December 3, 1891, Mountjoy Prison, Dublin, Ireland. Senior Warden Patrick Donnelly's body swings gently from a beam in the execution chamber, his neck broken, his face frozen in an expression witnesses would later describe as recognition of something unspeakable. But it's what investigators find at his feet that stops them cold. A black cat sitting perfectly still, watching them with amber eyes. Around the animal's neck, a ledger string threaded through a brass key. The same key used to access the execution records. When they open that ledger, they discover something that defies explanation. 9 names, 9 execution dates. 9 deaths the warden had predicted with perfect accuracy. Weeks, sometimes months, before the sentences were even handed down, and beside each name a small paw print pressed in ink. The cat had been present at every single hanging. But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the Mountjoy Prison hangman's cat, the black feline present at every execution, and the warden found hanged after 9 deaths the cat predicted, make sure to subscribe to the Silent Abbey and ring that notification bell. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers, so drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. This is a story that will challenge everything you think you know about justice, superstition, and the darkness that can lurk in the most official of places. Ireland in 1891 exists in a state of profound tension. The country writhes under British rule, caught between the failures of the Land League movement and the approaching fall of Charles Stewart Parnell. The Irish Parliamentary Party splinters, agrarian violence flares in the countryside, and in Dublin, Mountjoy Prison stands as a grey monument to colonial authority, a fortress of limestone and Irish granite designed to break both bodies and spirits. The prison opened in 1850, built on 7 acres of what had been farmland in the Phibsborough district. Its radial design follows the model of London's Pentonville, 5 wings spreading from a central hall like the spokes of a wheel, allowing guards to observe everything from a single vantage point. The architect called it progressive rehabilitation through surveillance. The prisoners called it hell. By 1891, Mountjoy houses over 600 inmates in spaces designed for 400. The male wings overflow with political prisoners, common criminals, debtors, and those deemed insane with nowhere else to go. The smell, unwashed bodies, chamber pots, limestone dust, and something else, something like despair made manifest, permeates every corridor. The execution chamber occupies the far end of C Wing, isolated from the general population but never quite far enough. When the trapdoor falls, everyone in Mountjoy hears it. Patrick Donnelly has served as senior warden for 12 years. At 53, he presents as the model of institutional authority, precise in his routines, impeccable in his record-keeping, unfailingly proper in his correspondence with Dublin Castle. His subordinates describe him as fair but distant. His wife, who died of consumption in 1887, left him childless. He lives alone in the warden's residence, a compact limestone house within the prison walls, surrounded by the very men he confines. No one can recall exactly when the cat first appeared. Some guards remember seeing a black feline slipping through the prison gates in late 1889. Others insist it materialized during the harsh winter of 1890, when rats grew so bold they'd emerge in daylight, gnawing at the prisoners' meager rations. Officer James Byrne, who worked the night shift in C Wing, later testified that the cat seemed to appear and disappear at will, as if the stone walls held no barrier for it. What everyone agrees on is this: Warden Donnelly took an immediate and peculiar interest in the creature. He fed it scraps from his own table. He allowed it to roam freely through areas, strictly forbidden to all other animals. He named it Cromwell, a choice that drew dark laughs from the Irish guards and knowing nods from their English supervisors. Oliver Cromwell, after all, had laid waste to Ireland with methodical brutality. The name seemed fitting for a creature that haunted an execution chamber. The prison chaplain, Father Declan O'Malley, noted Donnelly's attachment with growing concern. In his personal diary, recovered after the events of December 1891, he wrote, "The warden speaks to that animal as one might address a colleague. I observed him yesterday in earnest conversation with the beast, gesturing toward the execution records as if seeking its counsel. When I approached, he fell silent immediately, his expression that of a man caught in something shameful. The cat regarded me with eyes that seemed to hold an intelligence beyond the merely animal. I blessed myself and retreated, but Father O'Malley's concerns went deeper. He'd begun to notice a pattern, one that he initially dismissed as coincidence, then as his own imagination working overtime in that oppressive place. The pattern involved the cat's behavior in the days preceding scheduled executions. The feline would disappear from the prison entirely, sometimes for days at a time. Then, without fail, it would reappear in the warden's office within hours of a new execution order arriving from Dublin Castle. As if it knew. As if something called it back. Thomas Brennan, 32, stood convicted of murdering a landlord's agent during an eviction in County Mayo. His execution date set for March 1, 1890. Standard procedure. A political killing that had sparked riots in the West. Dublin Castle wanted it handled quietly, efficiently. On February 14th, 15 days before Brennan's scheduled hanging, guard officer Michael Kavanagh arrived for his morning shift to find Warden Donnelly in the execution chamber. The warden stood at the trapdoor mechanism, running his hands over the lever as if checking its operation. Nothing unusual there. Wardens often inspected the equipment, but Cromwell sat on the platform itself, directly where the condemned would stand, and the cat was making a sound Kavanagh had never heard before, a low rhythmic moan that seemed to vibrate through the limestone walls. "Sir?" Kavanagh called from the doorway. "Is everything all right?" Donnelly turned slowly. His face appeared gaunt in the weak morning light filtering through the chamber's single window. "Officer Kavanagh, yes. Simply conducting routine maintenance." "Routine maintenance, sir? The execution's not for more than 2 weeks. Precisely why I check now." Donnelly's voice held an edge. "One cannot be too careful in matters of such gravity." Kavanagh glanced at the cat, which had fallen silent and now groomed its paw with studied disinterest. "Should I have the animal removed, sir? It seems to be in the way." "Leave Cromwell be, he's no trouble." Kavanagh retreated, but the incident nagged at him. That evening he mentioned it to Father O'Malley during their nightly rounds. The priest listened, his expression growing grave. "Michael," Father O'Malley said carefully, "have you noticed anything else unusual about the warden's behavior?" "He's always been a bit odd, Father. Keeps to himself. I mean specifically regarding the executions, his preparation for them." Kavanagh thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, he's been spending considerable time in the records room, going through old execution logs. Sometimes I see candlelight under that door well past midnight." What neither man knew at the time was that Warden Donnelly had already added Thomas Brennan's name to a private ledger, one that wouldn't be discovered for nearly 2 years. Beside Brennan's name, written in Donnelly's precise copperplate hand, February 14, 1890, confirmed, and beside the notation, a small black paw print pressed in ink. Thomas Brennan hanged on March 1, 1890. The execution proceeded without incident. Donnelly supervised personally, as he always did. Cromwell sat in the corner of the chamber throughout, amber eyes fixed on the condemned man. 3 witnesses later reported that the cat began its low moan exactly 30 seconds before the trapdoor fell, as if counting down to the moment of death. James Murphy hadn't been sentenced to death yet. He hadn't even been tried. Murphy, a dock worker from Ringsend, stood accused of killing another laborer during a dispute over wages. The case seemed straightforward. Multiple witnesses, a clear motive, a body with Murphy's distinctive knife still embedded in the ribcage. But murder cases in Ireland often became complicated by politics, by questions of English versus Irish justice, by the perpetual tension that made every legal proceeding a potential powder keg. Murphy's trial was scheduled for May 1890. The prosecutor felt confident, the defense less so. But the judge assigned to the case, Justice William Harrington, had a reputation for leniency in cases involving working-class defendants. Some expected Murphy might receive life imprisonment rather than the noose. On April 22, 1890, 9 days before the trial even began, guard officer Liam Walsh encountered Warden Donnelly in the prison's administrative building at 3 a.m. Walsh had been summoned to deal with a disturbance in B-Wing, a prisoner claiming he saw shadows moving with intention along the walls of his cell. Likely opium withdrawal, Walsh thought, or early stages of prison madness. But as Walsh passed the records room, he heard voices. He stopped. One voice belonged unmistakably to Warden Donnelly. The other seemed higher, almost like a woman's voice, but with a quality that made the hair on Walsh's neck stand up. It sounded wet somehow, as if the speaker talked through water. Walsh knocked. The voices stopped immediately. "Sir?" Walsh called. "Is someone with you?" A long pause. Then Donnelly opened the door 6 inches. His face appeared flushed, his collar loose. Behind him, Walsh glimpsed Cromwell sitting on the desk amid scattered papers. The cat's amber eyes caught the lamplight and seemed to glow. "Officer Walsh, what is it?" "I heard voices, sir. I thought perhaps I was reading aloud from the records, a habit of mine when working late. It helps me concentrate." Walsh tried to peer past the warden. "Reading aloud, sir? Is there something you need, Officer Walsh?" "No, sir. There was a disturbance in B-Wing, but it's handled now. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right up here. Everything is perfectly fine. Return to your duties. Donnelly closed the door. Walsh stood in the corridor for a moment, uncertain. He could hear nothing from inside now. No reading aloud, no movement, nothing but silence thick enough to touch. The next morning, guard officer Seamus Doherty arrived to find something peculiar. The records room door stood ajar. Inside, the warden's private ledger lay open on the desk. Doherty, curious, approached for a closer look. He saw names listed in chronological order. Execution dates, notes about the prisoner's crimes and dispositions, and there, added in fresh ink that had barely dried, James Murphy, dock murder, trial May 1890, confirmed. Doherty knew the Murphy case, everyone did, but no sentence had been passed, no execution date had been set. Yet here was Warden Donnelly, apparently so certain of the outcome that he'd already added Murphy to his execution records. Doherty mentioned this to Father O'Malley that afternoon. The priest's face drained of color. "Are you certain the ink was fresh?" "Certain, Father. And there was something else. A smell in that room, like burning hair, but sweet somehow. Made me feel sick." Father O'Malley crossed himself. "Seamus, I want you to do something for me. I want you to watch that cat, watch where it goes, what it does, and report back to me. Tell no one else about this." "You think the warden's involved in something improper?" "I think," Father O'Malley said carefully, "that we may be dealing with matters beyond the merely improper." James Murphy's trial concluded on May 8, 1890, despite Justice Harrington's reputation for leniency. Despite the defense's competent arguments about Murphy's character and the victim's provocation, the jury returned a guilty verdict after only 40 minutes of deliberation. Justice Harrington, looking pale and distracted, sentenced Murphy to death by hanging. Execution date, June 6, 1890. When Warden Donnelly received the official notification from Dublin Castle, he showed no surprise whatsoever. By late summer, Father O'Malley had compiled a disturbing dossier. With the help of guard officers Doherty, Walsh, and Kavanagh, he'd been documenting Warden Donnelly's increasingly erratic behavior. The warden now spent entire nights in the execution chamber. Guards reported seeing candlelight flickering under the door, hearing that same wet, high voice in conversation with Donnelly's lower tones. Cromwell moved through the prison like a shadow with purpose, appearing and disappearing in ways that seemed to violate basic physics. One guard swore he saw the cat walk through a locked iron door. Another reported watching it climb a vertical stone wall without using its claws, as if gravity had simply released its hold. Then, in August 1890, 3 sets of execution records vanished from the archives. The missing files all pertained to executions that had occurred in the 1870s and early 1880s, before Donnelly's tenure as senior warden, but during his time as assistant warden. The records included detailed notes about the condemned prisoners' crimes, their behavior in their final days, the specifics of their executions, and witness accounts. Father O'Malley reported the missing files to Deputy Governor Richard Thornton, a practical Englishman who'd served in colonial prisons from India to Jamaica before accepting the position at Mountjoy. Thornton listened with visible skepticism. "Father, are you suggesting the warden stole his own prison's records?" "I'm suggesting the records are missing and Warden Donnelly is the only person with unrestricted access to that archive. To what purpose? Why would he remove execution records?" Father O'Malley had his theories, but they sounded mad even in his own mind. He settled for facts. "Sir, I've documented 23 instances of irregular behavior. I have witness testimonies from multiple guards. I believe an investigation is warranted." Thornton sighed. "Father, Patrick Donnelly has served this institution for 20 years without a single mark against his record. He is meticulous, dedicated, and respected by Dublin Castle. If records have been misfiled or lost, there are a dozen explanations more likely than theft. What about the cat? What about it? Doesn't it strike you as unusual that Warden Donnelly allows an animal unrestricted access to Father O'Malley?" Thornton's voice hardened. "I appreciate your dedication to this prison and its spiritual health, but I will not launch an investigation based on superstitious concerns about a cat. The warden keeps a pet. Many wardens do. It catches rats. End of discussion." Father O'Malley left Thornton's office knowing he'd made an enemy. But he also knew something Thornton didn't. That very morning, he'd observed Warden Donnelly in the chapel during hours it should have been locked. The warden knelt before the altar with Cromwell beside him. Both faced the crucifix. And Donnelly had been whispering something in Latin, but Latin twisted somehow, the syllables reversed, as if he spoke the language backward. When Father O'Malley entered the chapel, Donnelly rose smoothly. "Father, I was just praying." "Praying, Mr. Donnelly? I wasn't aware you were a religious man. I find solace here sometimes. The quiet helps me think." Father O'Malley glanced at Cromwell W. Ho sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the priest. "Mr. Donnelly, I'd like to speak with you about the missing execution records." "Missing records? I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "3 files have vanished from the archive, all from the period when you served as assistant warden." Donnelly's expression didn't change. "I see. And you believe I'm responsible?" "I believe you might have information that could help locate them." For a long moment the two men stared at each other. Then Donnelly smiled, a thin, terrible smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Father, those records contained information that certain parties might find inconvenient. If they've vanished, perhaps that's for the best. Some doors, once open, should remain closed." "What does that mean?" But Donnelly simply walked past him, Cromwell trotting at his heels. At the chapel door he paused. "Father, a word of advice. Be careful what you seek to uncover in this place. Mountjoy has secrets older than both of us. Some of them are better left buried." October brought 3 executions in rapid succession, an unusual concentration that stretched the prison's resources and everyone's nerves. All 3 condemned men were Irish nationalists convicted of bombing a customs house in Belfast. Their cases had been rushed through the courts with brutal efficiency. Dublin Castle wanted them hanged before they could become martyrs. The first execution, on October 8th, proceeded normally. The second, on October 15th, did not. Guard officer Michael Kavanagh stood witness as required. He later testified that everything seemed standard until the moment the trapdoor opened. The condemned man, Padraig Sullivan, dropped. His neck should have broken instantly. Warden Donnelly personally calculated the drop distance based on Sullivan's height and weight, as he always did. The mathematics of judicial hanging had been refined to a science. But Sullivan didn't die instantly. The rope caught him wrong. He swung, choking, struggling, his feet jerking in a grotesque dance just inches above the floor of the chamber below. It should have taken seconds. It took 4.5 minutes, and throughout those 4.5 minutes, Cromwell sat at the edge of the platform, watching with what Kavanagh described as an expression of satisfaction. When Sullivan finally died, Warden Donnelly's face bore no expression at all. He simply noted the time in his ledger, checked the body, and ordered it removed. But as the guards carried Sullivan's corpse out, Kavanagh swore he heard the cat purring, a deep, rumbling purr that seemed far too loud for an animal that size. The third execution, scheduled for October 22nd, never happened. The condemned man, Liam O'Brien, died in his cell 2 days before the scheduled hanging. The official cause, heart failure. He was 31 years old with no prior history of heart trouble. The prison physician, Dr. Marcus Webb, performed a cursory examination and signed the death certificate without requesting an autopsy. But Father O'Malley, who'd attended O'Brien in his final days, told a different story. In his diary he wrote, "O'Brien claimed the cat visited him nightly. He said it sat on his chest while he slept, growing heavier and heavier until he couldn't breathe. He said it whispered to him in a voice that sounded like his dead mother. He said it showed him visions of his own execution, not the hanging, but something worse. Something involving fire and endless falling. When I found him dead this morning, his face bore an expression of absolute terror. His hands were clenched so tightly that his nails had drawn blood from his own palms. And there, on his chest, I found a single black hair." Father O'Malley took the hair to Dr. Webb, demanding a proper investigation. Webb dismissed him. The man had a weak heart. The stress of impending execution was too much. It happens sometimes. What about the hair? What about the condition of the body? Cat hair proves nothing, Father. This prison is full of rodents and the cats that hunt them. As for his expression and physical state, I've seen condemned men die of pure fright before. It's tragic but not unprecedented." But Father O'Malley noticed something else. When he mentioned the cat hair to Dr. Webb, the physician's hands trembled slightly. His eyes darted toward the door, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Dr. Webb," Father O'Malley said quietly, "are you afraid of something?" Webb set down his instruments with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Father, I've worked in prisons for 15 years. I've seen men die in every conceivable way, but I've never seen anything like what's happening in Mountjoy. I have no scientific explanation for the things I've witnessed, and if I valued my position and my sanity, I'd advise you to stop asking questions. What have you witnessed?" Webb shook his head. "I've said too much already. Please, Father, for your own sake, let this go." But Father O'Malley couldn't let it go, because that night he received an anonymous note slipped under his door, Written in a shaky hand, it read, "The warden feeds its souls, 9 so far. You'll be the 10th if you don't stop. It gets stronger with each one. Check the ledger. Check the dates. It knew before anyone. They all died exactly as it predicted." If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. Let's discover what happens next. December 3rd, 1891, 6:47 a.m. Guard Officer James Byrne arrives for his morning shift at Mountjoy Prison. The winter air carries ice in its breath. His footsteps echo on the limestone as he crosses the yard toward Sea Wing. Nothing seems amiss. Nothing ever does until suddenly everything is. Byrne notices the execution chamber door standing open. This violates protocol. The chamber remains locked except during active preparations for a hanging. No execution is scheduled for weeks. He approaches cautiously, hand instinctively moving toward his truncheon. The scene inside stops him in the doorway. Warden Patrick Donnelly hangs from the execution beam. His body turns slowly in some invisible current of air. The noose around his neck is prison-issue rope, the same type used for official executions. His face has turned purple, eyes bulging, tongue protruding. Textbook hanging death. But it's the staging that transforms this from simple suicide into something far more disturbing. Donnelly's body has been positioned exactly where a condemned prisoner would stand. The trapdoor beneath him hangs open. He used a chair, Byrne thinks at first, then kicked it away. Standard suicide method. But there's no chair, no stool, no overturned furniture of any kind. Nothing to suggest how Donnelly managed to get his own neck into a noose positioned 7 feet above the platform floor. Cromwell sits at the edge of the open trapdoor, directly below Donnelly's swinging feet. The cat watches Byrne with those amber eyes. Around its neck, threaded on a piece of ledger string, hangs a brass key. Byrne backs out of the chamber slowly, never taking his eyes off the cat. He runs for help. Within 20 minutes, the execution chamber fills with officials. Deputy Governor Thornton arrives, followed by Father O'Malley, Dr. Webb, and a contingent of guards. They cut Donnelly down and lay his body on the platform. Dr. Webb performs his examination while everyone watches in silence. "Definitely hanging," Webb announces, "neck broken. Death would have been instantaneous." He pauses, frowning. But there's something odd about the lividity pattern. The blood pooling suggests he'd been dead for several hours before being suspended, but the neck injury is consistent with a drop hang, not strangulation. "What does that mean?" Thornton demands. "It means, I'm not entirely certain, what happened here." Father O'Malley approaches the cat, which hasn't moved. He reaches for the key around its neck. Cromwell allows this, sitting perfectly still as the priest removes the string. The key bears the number 7, the designation for the Restricted Records Archive. "We need to open the archive," Father O'Malley says. Thornton nods reluctantly. They proceed to the records room, Cromwell trailing behind them like a member of the investigative party. The cat's presence should seem absurd in such a solemn moment, but somehow it doesn't. Somehow it feels entirely appropriate. The archive key opens a locked cabinet containing Warden Donnelly's private files. Inside, they find his personal ledger. Father O'Malley opens it with trembling hands. The others crowd around to see. The ledger contains 9 names, 9 dates, 9 execution details. But these aren't standard records. These are predictions, entries made weeks or months before the prisoners were even sentenced to death. Beside each name, a small black paw print pressed in ink. And beside each paw print, notes in Donnelly's handwriting that grow increasingly frantic and incoherent as the pages progress. Thomas Brennan, February 14, 1890, confirmed by C. The rope must be exact, the drop must be calculated. He will die on March 1st. I have seen it. James Murphy, April 22, 1890, C knows before the trial. Justice Harrington will condemn him despite his nature. The verdict is already written. June 6th is the date. Padraig Sullivan, September 30th, 1890, C shows me the slow death. The drop must be miscalculated. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Every second is necessary. And so on through 7 more names, 7 more predicted deaths, 7 more executions that occurred exactly as Donnelly had foreseen weeks in advance. But it's the final entry that makes everyone in that room go cold. Patrick Donnelly, December 3, 1891, the 9th and final feeding. The covenant is complete. C has grown strong enough. After this, C will choose its own wardens, its own sentences, its own executions. I have fulfilled my part. The hanging will be at dawn. I will drop exactly as the others dropped. My soul is the payment for the knowledge C provided. I regret nothing. The power was worth the price. Father O'Malley looks at Cromwell. The cat stares back, and in that moment the priest sees something move behind those amber eyes, something vast and old and hungry. Deputy Governor Thornton snatches the ledger. This is madness. Donnelly had gone insane. That's the only explanation. He was mad, and he killed himself in some elaborate delusion. Then how, Father O'Malley interrupts, did he predict 9 execution sentences before they were handed down? How did he know the exact dates, the exact outcomes, weeks before judges rendered verdicts? Coincidence, or perhaps he influenced the proceedings somehow, bribed officials, manipulated evidence, all 9 cases, across multiple jurisdictions, with different judges, prosecutors, and juries? Father O'Malley shakes his head. No, Mr. Thornton, there's something else at work here. Guard Officer Kavanagh speaks up from the doorway. Sirs, you should see this. They follow him back to the execution chamber. Kavanagh points to the floor around the trapdoor. In the dust and grime, someone, or something, has traced symbols. They form a circle around the opening where Donnelly's body hung. The symbols are ancient, pre-Christian, the sort that appear in manuscripts kept locked in Trinity College's restricted archive. Dr. Webb kneels to examine them more closely. His medical training includes comparative anthropology, and he recognizes some of the forms. These are binding symbols. Celtic, I think, or older. They're used in rituals meant to anchor something, to give it permanent residence in a location. Anchor what? Thornton's voice has lost its certainty. If the folklore is accurate, a spirit, a demon, something that exists beyond normal physical constraints. Webb looks up at them. Gentlemen, I'm a man of science, but I'm looking at evidence of a ritual suicide designed to feed something supernatural. And unless we're all sharing the same delusion, that something is currently sitting in this room with us. Of new senior warden at earliest convenience. The report makes no mention of Cromwell, no mention of the symbols on the floor, no mention of 9 predicted executions. The ledger disappears into Dublin Castle's archives, classified as evidence of mental instability, not for public disclosure. But the truth has a way of leaking out, especially in Ireland, where every secret becomes a story and every story becomes a weapon. Father O'Malley, forbidden from speaking officially about the incident, confides in Father Michael Brennan, a colleague at All Saints Church in Phibsborough. Father Brennan records everything in his own diary, adding his theological interpretation. If Father O'Malley's account is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt his sanity or his honesty, then Mountjoy Prison has become a dwelling place for what medieval scholars called a psychopomp, a spirit that feeds on the transition between life and death. Such entities appear in folklore worldwide. They gather where death is ritualized, systematized, made routine. Battlefields attract them, hospitals sometimes. And prisons, especially prisons where execution is carried out with bureaucratic precision. Father Brennan's diary also contains a chilling postscript. Father O'Malley reports that executions at Mountjoy have continued without interruption. The new senior warden, Mr. Albert Crawford, appears competent and untroubled. But Father O'Malley swears the cat remains. He sees it in corridors, in the chapel, in the execution chamber. Always watching, always present. And he claims, though he admits this sounds mad, that recently condemned prisoners sometimes report dreams of a black cat that tells them the exact date of their death. The dreams always prove accurate. The British government, already dealing with escalating Irish unrest, has no interest in supernatural investigations. Deputy Governor Thornton's report is accepted without question, case closed. But several people refuse to let it rest. Guard Officer Michael Kavanagh leaves Mountjoy Prison in March 1892, citing personal reasons. In a letter to his brother preserved in family archives, he writes, I cannot work in that place any longer, knowing what I know. Every execution I witness, I see that cat watching. Every condemned prisoner I guard, I wonder if their sentence was somehow influenced by the thing that dwells. Editing this message will create a new conversation branch. You can switch between branches using the arrow navigation buttons. Cancel save there. The work has become unbearable. Better to find employment elsewhere, even if it means less pay. Guard Officer Liam Walsh develops what his doctors call nervous exhaustion. He begins drinking heavily. In an incident witnessed by multiple colleagues in May 1892, Walsh enters the prison drunk and tries to strangle Cromwell with his bare hands in front of dozens of witnesses. The cat escapes unharmed. Walsh is committed to Richmond Asylum, where he remains for 3 years before being released into his family's care. He never works again. Dr. Marcus Webb continues as prison physician but begins keeping meticulous private notes about unexplained phenomena within Mountjoy. His journal, discovered after his death in 1903, contains hundreds of entries describing strange occurrences: prisoners dying of sudden heart failure hours before scheduled executions, guards reporting nightmares about the cat, witnesses at hangings hearing voices that seem to come from nowhere, and recurring instances of execution equipment malfunctioning in ways that prolong suffering. Webb also documents something else, a statistical anomaly in sentencing patterns. Starting in 1890 and continuing through 1900, condemned prisoners at Mountjoy die at exactly the times predicted in their initial booking records, not the official sentencing documents, but the preliminary paperwork filed when prisoners first arrive, as if someone knows their fate before judges render verdicts. The variation rate is 0, perfect prediction across 10 years and 73 executions. Webb writes, "I am not a superstitious man. I believe in empirical evidence, but the evidence before me suggests that something within Mountjoy Prison possesses knowledge of future events. Whether this something is a demon, as Father O'Malley believes, or some phenomenon not yet understood by science, I cannot say. What I can say with certainty is that judicial outcomes at Mountjoy ceased being entirely human decisions after Patrick Donnelly's death. Some other intelligence now participates in the process." Father O'Malley conducts his own investigation, interviewing every prisoner scheduled for execution between December 1891 and August 1892. He documents their testimonies in a manuscript he titles The Mountjoy Confession. Excerpts include, "The black cat came to me in my sleep 3 nights running. It told me I would hang on March 15th. My trial hadn't even started, but it knew. It said my soul would feed something old and hungry, and in return justice would be served. I didn't understand then. Now I do." Thomas Kelly, executed March 15, 1892. "I tried to be good. I confessed my crime. I expressed genuine remorse, but the cat appeared in my cell and said none of that mattered. The date was already set. April 2nd, it said, and it was right. The judge seemed almost reluctant when he pronounced sentence, as if the words were being pulled from him against his will." Bridget Sullivan, executed April 2nd, 1892. "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of what comes after. The cat showed me. It opened its mouth and I saw down into something endless and black and full of teeth. That's where I'm going. Not hell like the priests say, somewhere else. Somewhere the cat takes us." Sean McBride, executed June 6, 1892. Father O'Malley submits the Mountjoy Confession to the Archbishop of Dublin, requesting an official church investigation into potential demonic activity at the prison. The Archbishop, caught between spiritual duty and political reality, forwards the manuscript to Rome with a cautious recommendation for further study. Rome's response arrives 8 months later. The testimonies presented suggest psychological distress consistent with condemned prisoners facing execution. While the Church acknowledges the reality of demonic activity, it finds insufficient evidence to warrant formal investigation in this instance. Prison environments naturally produce psychological phenomena that can mimic supernatural occurrence. Recommend increased pastoral care for condemned prisoners and regular blessing of the facility. Translation: The Church won't touch this. Too controversial. Too likely to cause scandal. Better to let it fade away. But it doesn't fade away. Throughout the 1890s, stories about Mountjoy's hanging cat spread through Dublin's pubs, working-class neighborhoods, and nationalist circles. The stories grow with each telling, acquiring details both true and fabricated. Some say the cat can speak human languages. Some say it grows larger with each execution. Some say touching it brings instant death. Some say it's the ghost of Oliver Cromwell himself, returned to torment the Irish. The truth becomes impossible to separate from myth, but the core story remains consistent. A black cat at Mountjoy Prison knows when prisoners will die, and 9 men fed its souls to give it power. In 1897, a young journalist named William O'Brien publishes an article in the United Irishman titled, "The Hangman's Familiar Folklore or Reality at Mountjoy Prison." The article carefully avoids making supernatural claims but presents documented testimonies from guards, prisoners, and chaplains about unusual occurrences related to a black cat. Dublin Castle demands a retraction. The United Irishman refuses. The article is reprinted in nationalist newspapers across Ireland and in Irish-American publications in Boston and New York. The publicity forces a response. In October 1897, Deputy Governor Thornton, now Governor Thornton following a promotion, issues a formal statement. Mountjoy Prison maintains a small population of cats for rodent control purposes, as do most institutions of this type. These are ordinary felines serving a practical function. Stories attributing supernatural characteristics to these animals are baseless superstition. The prison administration regrets that folklore has been allowed to obscure the important work of justice carried out within our walls. The statement convinces almost no one. The stories continue, and the executions continue. 73 between 1892 and 1900, then 31 more between 1900 and 1910, all proceeding with mechanical efficiency, all occurring exactly as predicted in the preliminary paperwork, all witnessed by a black cat that never seems to age, never seems to leave, never seems to be just a cat. In 1910, Father Declan O'Malley, now elderly and in poor health, makes a final entry in his diary. I have served as chaplain at Mountjoy for 33 years. I have attended 114 executions. I have offered last rites to 114 souls, and I can no longer deny what I know to be true. Something unholy resides within these walls. It feeds on death. It influences fate. It may even be, in some terrible sense, the actual instrument of justice here, determining who dies and when they die through mechanisms beyond human understanding. Patrick Donnelly made a bargain with it. He gave it form and power. And now it is woven into the very fabric of how justice operates at Mountjoy. I fear it cannot be removed. I fear it has become permanent. May God have mercy on us all. Father O'Malley dies 3 weeks later, at age 67, of natural causes, or so the death certificate claims. But the nurse attending him in his final hours reports something strange. Father O'Malley's last words, whispered with his dying breath, were, "The cat is here. The cat is always here." The Mountjoy case, though officially dismissed as superstition, raises profound questions about the intersection of human justice and the unknown. It represents a unique category in the history of penal institutions, not a haunting in the traditional sense, but something closer to an institutional possession, an entity that became integrated into the bureaucratic process of legal execution. Similar cases emerged throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, though none as well documented as Mountjoy. In 1893, guards at Newgate Prison in London report recurring appearances of a black dog in the execution chamber. The phenomenon is dismissed as mass hysteria until a statistical analysis reveals that prisoners who report seeing the dog before trial are convicted at a rate of 97%, regardless of the strength of evidence against them. In 1899, San Quentin Prison in California experiences what officials called the crying wall incident. For 3 months, guards and prisoners report hearing weeping sounds emanating from the stones near the gas chamber, a facility that won't be built for another 40 years. When the gas chamber is eventually constructed in 1938, it's located exactly where the crying sounds were heard. In 1904, a prison warden in Brisbane, Australia, maintains a journal describing his conversations with what he calls the hanging tree, an ancient eucalyptus that stands in the execution yard. The tree, he claims, tells him which prisoners deserve death and which deserve mercy. His execution recommendations are followed with unusual consistency by sentencing judges, despite the warden having no official role in the judicial process. These cases suggest a disturbing possibility that the ritual of state execution, performed repeatedly in the same locations with bureaucratic precision, creates conditions for something to emerge, something that feeds on the convergence of death, judgment, and institutional power. Dr. Heinrich Volker, a German psychologist studying institutional psychology in 1906, proposes what he calls locus mortem theory, the idea that locations where deaths occur systematically and ritualistically can develop what he describes as psychic momentum, a tendency to facilitate continued death regardless of external factors. He writes, "Just as water finds channels through rock and flows more readily where it has flowed before, so too does death create pathways in certain spaces. Execution chambers, battlefields, hospitals, these places bear the weight of accumulated dying, and in rare cases that weight becomes sentient." Volker's theory is rejected by mainstream academia as pseudoscience, but it finds an audience among prison reformers who use it to argue for the abolition of capital punishment. If execution chambers can become haunted in some real sense, if they can develop autonomous tendencies toward death, then the entire practice of judicial killing becomes morally suspect. The Irish nationalist movement seizes on the Mountjoy story as evidence of British justice's moral bankruptcy. Speakers at rallies invoke the demon of the rope as a metaphor for colonial oppression. Pamphlets circulate with illustrations of a black cat sitting atop British scales of justice, tipping them with its paw. The cat becomes a symbol, both literal and figurative, of justice corrupted by cruelty. When Ireland gains independence in 1922, one of the first acts of the new government is to commission a full investigation into Mountjoy's practices under British administration. The investigation uncovers evidence of numerous irregularities, though nothing explicitly supernatural. However, investigators note something peculiar. Execution records from 1890 to 1922 show abnormally high rates of suicide by execution, prisoners who essentially confess to capital crimes they likely didn't commit, as if compelled toward judicial death. The investigation recommends abolishing capital punishment at Mountjoy. The recommendation is not followed. Executions continue through 1954, when the last hanging occurs at the prison. But the abolition debate sparked by the Mountjoy case contributes to a broader movement. By the late 20th century, most European nations have ended capital punishment. The reasons given are primarily moral and practical, but some reformers privately cite concerns about what they call institutional darkness, the tendency of execution facilities to become psychologically and perhaps spiritually toxic over time. Modern criminologists studying the history of capital punishment note statistical anomalies at certain facilities, Mountjoy among them. Between 1890 and 1954, prisoners executed at Mountjoy died at the exact times predicted in their initial booking records with zero variation. This perfect prediction rate exists nowhere else in the criminal justice system during that period. It suggests either unprecedented administrative precision or something beyond administrative explanation. The case also raises questions about the nature of justice itself. If an entity, whether supernatural or psychological, can influence judicial outcomes, then to what extent are legal proceedings truly independent? How much of what we call justice is actually human choice, and how much is something else wearing the costume of human institutions? These are uncomfortable questions. Most institutions prefer not to ask them, but the Mountjoy case makes them unavoidable. The prison itself continues to operate today, though no executions have occurred since 1954. Mountjoy now houses approximately 700 prisoners in conditions modestly improved from its Victorian origins. The execution chamber has been converted to administrative space. The warden's residence where Patrick Donnelly lived has been demolished. But prisoners still report seeing a black cat in the corridors. Guards still find paw prints in places cats shouldn't be able to reach. And occasionally condemned prisoners, though Ireland no longer has capital punishment, report dreams of a cat that tells them when they'll die. These prisoners invariably die on the dates predicted, though the causes are officially listed as natural or accidental. The Catholic Church maintains a permanent chaplain at Mountjoy. Current chaplain Father Ronan Lynch, who has served since 2008, admits in private conversations that he performs monthly blessings of the former execution chamber. When asked why, he responds, "There are places where the veil between worlds has been torn by violence, by pain, by systematic death. Those places need continuous spiritual attention. Not to banish what's there, I'm not sure that's possible anymore, but to contain it, to prevent it from spreading." The Mountjoy case ultimately reveals something unsettling about the human relationship with institutionalized death. When we systematize killing, when we make it bureaucratic and routine, we create conditions for something to emerge. Whether that something is psychological, spiritual, or genuinely demonic matters less than the fact of its existence. Patrick Donnelly discovered this truth. It cost him his soul. But his legacy persists in every prison that carries out executions, in every institution that deals in systematic death. The hanging cat may be unique to Mountjoy, but what it represents, the shadow cast by the noose, the hunger that grows where justice feeds on itself, that exists anywhere humans kill in the name of law. What do you think drove Warden Patrick Donnelly to make a bargain with something so clearly malevolent? Was he seeking power, knowledge, or something else? And do you believe entities like the Mountjoy cat can actually exist? Or is there a psychological explanation for what happened in that prison? Leave your theories in the comments below. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers, and this case has enough ambiguity to support multiple interpretations. If you found this story as disturbing as we did, make sure you're subscribed to the Silent Abbey so you never miss our deep dives into history's darkest corners. We've got more cases like this one. Stories that exist in that uncomfortable space between documented fact and unexplained phenomenon. What other historical mysteries would you like us to investigate? Drop your suggestions in the comments. We read every single one, and your feedback helps shape our content. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that might actually be true. See you in the next video.